WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. How to design and implement accessible cards with speaker Tina Reis, WordPress developer and SEO consultant at Tina Reis Webentwicklung. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Welcome everyone to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. If you're in the Eastern time zone like me, it's morning, so good morning. I'm Sherose Badruddin. I work at the University of North Carolina. I'm a digital accessibility consultant, and I'm so grateful to be here. I did want to make a note to announce that Melissa Spiegel, who was scheduled to be here today, was unable to attend. She's in Florida dealing with the fallout from Hurricane Milton, and we're grateful for her for trying to volunteer. And we're especially grateful for Tina Rice, who's here and able to join us today for their session, How to Design and Implement Accessible Cards. A bit about Tina. Tina is a SEO consultant and WordPress developer specializing in web accessibility based in Berlin, Germany. They started out developing SEO strategies for websites large and small, from e-commerce to nonprofit sites. Later, they discovered their love for WordPress when working at an agency and taught themselves the skills of front-end development, learning more with every project. Now, with 8+ years of experience, Tina owns their own business and develops WordPress sites with a focus on accessibility and sustainability. They also give workshops and help organizations increase their online visibility with SEO. Please feel free all to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Use the chat to connect with other attendees. Tina, you can take it away.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm gonna share my screen. So, okay. Yes, so hello, I'm gonna talk about how to design and implement accessible cards today. Yeah, and first of all, I also want to say that I hope everybody who was affected by the hurricane in Florida is like safe. And yeah, so maybe I already had a good introduction. Thank you so much. Maybe just like one thing that I want to say is that, I mean, I have a disability myself, like I have ADHD, and I have a motor disability that is so far only affecting my legs. So my accessibility, like access needs when it comes to like the internet, I'm mostly not affected very much, which is good. But I just want to say this because everything I'm going to talk about here is mostly like what I've learned, like not from my own experience, but like what I've learned. And I'm also going to link to like some really good resources from people who have written about this topic before. So first of all, I want to start just by asking a very simple question, like what is a card? I looked at one of my favorite components libraries, Cody House. So here in the slide that I'm showing right now, you can see their gallery of components, and I've selected in this menu that they have that filters the gallery, I've selected card, and it shows like 23 items that are all very different from each other. So you have something like a video gallery that is labeled as cards. There's cards that are like like a slider type of component, and then there's the classic, I think, like image with text and a button. So those are all cards. I think when we think about it, what those all have in common, then we can say cards are usually interactive. So here I have a little example card that I'm going to be using throughout this talk. It's just a very simple, like interactive, like card with an image. Here I'm having on the image of a little bird. You'll see lots of birds in this presentation. Then there's a title, how to get started with bird watching, just a very nondescript little description text underneath, and then a button to read more. And I think like, as in this simple example, but like all cards, like no matter what they do, is that cards are interactive. Like here, this card wants you to click it and go to the article and read it. So, and the other thing that cards usually have in common is that they are one of many. So you use the card component to show like an overview of different elements on your website. Like here, very simple example again, just the blog overview. So each card leads to like a blog article. And I'm going to be working with this simple example in this presentation. So here in the image, I just have the same card example that I just mentioned with like an image, a title, a little description, and a read more button, and like 6 of them in a grid. Now, what I want to do today, I think that the card is a really interesting example from an accessibility perspective, because you can, like, it looks so simple, but it actually has a lot of considerations, that like a lot of ways you can think about this for accessibility. And I want to focus today on accessibility beyond compliance, so beyond WCAG, with a focus on usability. Like, how can you really get the most out of the component from a usability perspective? Because I think there's really like getting compliant with this is much easier than making it actually usable. And with all of that, I'm not reinventing the wheel here. And these are some really great resources where I have learned all these techniques and knowledge over the years developing WordPress websites. And I just want to name a few of them. So one of them is Hayden Pickering, who has these like great inclusive components library, and it also has a card component, which is great. And then there are also really good takes on accessible cards by Adrian Roselli and Kitty Jourodel, who is also in Berlin. If you get the slides afterwards, there will be the links also in the slide. And I've learned these techniques over the years, and what I'm going to show you is specifically how to do this with WordPress. And all the code examples that I'm going to show are like my code examples from my like WordPress project. Okay, so, and also we're going to do like more of a trial and error approach. So we're going to walk you through each of the considerations, and we're not going to start with like a finished result that I'm just going to explain to you, but we're going to work on creating a finished result during this talk. Okay, let's get started. First, like, what are the considerations? You wanted to have the card to have a logical structure. This is especially important, like for screenreader users, for example, where all the information needs to be in the semantic structure. You want to have a specific visual layout. Also, I'm a developer. I get designs from a designer, and so I have like I have a specific visual layout that I need to achieve, right? And then also I want to ensure that it is interactive, because that's like the core requirement for a card. Okay. Then let's tackle the first thing first, the having multiple cards in a row. Here I'm showing again my little grid with the preview, like with the cards, 6 cards in the grid. Now I'm going to show the bad example first. If you mark this up with like just divs, here on the left side, I've have a example HTML markup where it's just like div as the container and then divs for each of the cards. That doesn't give any information about what this actually is, for example, to a screen reader. So another example that you can do, which is a bit better, is you, for example, use a main tag for the container, and each of the cards are in an article tag. This is like a bit better because this gives us some actual information about what this is to like a screen reader, so the screen reader can give the users some like more information, more features. For example, with the main tag, this would show up if somebody uses the screen reader and navigates through the landmarks. They could directly go to the main content with this, but there's still a problem like with the article. Actually, not all screen readers have this as a landmark. So for, I think only like JAWS announces it as a landmark. So still, even though you're using like a semantic like HTML5 element, you're not really giving much information to screen reader users. Now a better example, and this is best practice, is to have it as a list markup. So here I've shown it as a basic HTML example with like an unnumbered list tag, and then each of the cards in a list item. What this gives you is like, this gives like a really good, because it is like a card as one of many. So a list, it gives that information to like a screen reader user. Okay, this is a list of, and then the screen reader will announce, okay, 6 items, and there's some navigation features that also come with that in the screen reader. Now, I took a look at like what most like WordPress like themes use, like and most like especially like the commonly used ones, the page builders, don't use the list markup for cards. I've actually seen more often like the article markup. And here a shout out to like Amber Hines of Equalize Digital, because she analyzed 10 page builders, and there only 2 used the list markup for their blog or posts loop. So this is definitely something that a lot of the WordPress themes and page builders are lacking. And that's why, for example, I work with like GeneratePress, and they also have like an article markup. And so I'm also often like building my own loops with my own cards elements. And yeah, and also want to mention like kudos to Avada and Briggs, because they were the 2 page builders that used list markup in this test. Yeah, so now we've decided we're going to have this as a list markup, and here I have like a very basic HTML markup for the item itself, for the card itself. So for this simple card, just as a reminder, it has the preview, the image, it has a title, it has a little descriptive text, and a read more link. Sometimes I say button, which is not correct, but I mean a read more link. Yeah, so and the basic HTML markup that we're going to work with is just as like a list item. I've given it a class of card, then it has an image. Here I've kept the alternative text empty, and we're going to talk about images, so don't you worry. Then the title I've marked up as an H2 headline, and the description just as a paragraph, and then we have the link at the bottom. Okay, so this is like generally like fine markup, but the problem is with the link, right? So here, for example, only the read more link is actually linked, but that's not usually what you expect of a card, right? You expect it like when I'm on my phone, I want to be able to click on the image and it directly brings me to the article. And I think this is also what, like, if you're designing like a card element that's like a marketing banner, that your marketing people will also want you to increase the click area. So what I see in a lot of WordPress themes is that they solve this by just adding links to all of the elements. So for example, this is an example image from the GeneratePress Solar demo site. I'm just like showing a lot of GeneratePress, not because they are bad, like just because that's the theme that I usually work with. It's actually a really cool theme. But here you can see they have also a basic card that leads to a blog article. And it has also like an image, it has some categories too. And it has a title and it has a read more link. So very similar to what we're working with. But here they've solved this issue of like increasing the click area by adding a link tag around the image, around the title, and around the read more. So you have 3 links leading to the same destination. This is not good. What this will lead to, like here, for example, if you're using the Wave accessibility testing tool, this will throw errors. Here, the error, I screenshotted the error. It says like redundant link, and then a lot of icons that show, okay, here's an error. And the explanation for it is that adjacent links go to the same destination, and that is like bad practice because it is confusing if you're using a screen reader. And also it's just like, yeah, it's just like redundant. It's adding a lot of noise. So now are we back to just keeping the link as on the read more button. Like, no, there's a better solution. So we want to work with only one link, but have the whole card clickable. And because if we're only having it on the like read more link, what happens then if screen reader users navigate the site, like because by listing out all the link elements on the site on the page. So this is one way that screen reader users can navigate a page by like saying, okay, give me all of the links. And then what happens is that it just says read more, read more, read more, and it's not descriptive. So this is definitely not a good solution. We can't do it like that. So the best practice would be to just ask yourself, okay, what is the most important, like the most descriptive element on this card? And I think that is here in this case, it's the headline. So we put the title here. I'm showing the basic HTML markup again. We're putting the link tag inside of the headline. So now we don't need the read more button anymore. We're going to discuss this a little bit later if that's really true, but like for now, we have now a good markup that gives like screen reader users a descriptive link. But still, we don't have the whole area clickable. And what we can do now is we use this little trick where we create like a pseudo element on the link and make it span with absolute positioning in CSS the whole card. And that is really neat, and I love this trick. Ever since I learned it, I use it all the time. It makes it so you only have one link and it's around the descriptive element, so that's good for screen reader users. But the whole area that is like the whole card element that is positioned relative, so that works, is clickable. And this is cool. So here I have the CSS. So if you later get the slides, you can just copy this. Yeah. Then one thing that like now you think like, oh, I have a good solution, but then your designer is like, hey, I want to put the author byline in there. So here, for example, I have another one of those cards. I'm switching the images up a little bit. So this is a different bird as a preview image. And here below the headline, we have an author byline. And often this is linked. So in this case, I think Hayden Pickering makes a really good point because he asks like, hey, do you really need this to be a link? Like, is it really, are people gonna see this in a blog overview and be like, oh, I'm gonna click directly on the author without having looked at the article first, like without having clicked through and read the article first. So I definitely recommend, like, I think this is a really good point, and I think you should think about, like, do we really need the link in there? If you say, yes, we really need this link, it's important. One thing that you can do is that you just give the link tag on the author byline a Z index of like higher than your pseudo element that is like the main card link. So here, for example, the pseudo element that makes the whole card clickable has a Z index of 1. I want to raise, like, make also the author clickable. So I'm going to raise it with a Z index of 2. And now you can see I've marked it up here. The click area is on the whole card that leads to the whole article, but then I love these reactions that you have in Zoom. Nice. Yeah, and then the author also has also is clickable. Right, but then I think now you can already kind of see it. The click area for the author link is like it's pretty small, right? So what can happen here, and here I'm showing the same, like the preview image, and I've pasted a photo of my finger, and I'm putting it over the author byline. And so now you can see that actually the author byline is smaller than my finger. And what can happen when you have these links kind of like on top of each other, right next to each other, it can lead to missteps, especially like just like with everybody, like on your mobile phone, and you know, you try to click something in a hurry, but also, for example, for people who, I don't know, have a tremor and like motor issues. it can be like incredibly frustrating if you want to click on one thing and land somewhere else. So this fortunately can be remedied. So what you do is you just add padding to the link, and then it's like, okay, cool. Now you've increased it, and you can see here, I marked up the padding in green. My finger is now roughly the same size as the click area for the author byline. Great. And you can keep the same visual layout, of course, by, I don't know, removing the margin on the headline, and like, shifting it around so it still looks the same, but it has a larger padding. Great. And then also one thing I want to say while we're talking about mistabs, here I'm showing like a mobile view of the same grid, and in a mobile view, all of the cards kind of like are stacked on top of each other. And here you have my finger again showing that the margin between the cards is quite, like if you keep it too small, then again, you have a problem of mistabs on mobile when people are scrolling. So I want to scroll, and I unexpectedly click on something, and then it, all hell breaks loose. And yeah, and I think you might think like, oh, this doesn't happen to me, or like it doesn't, but like if you, for example, have motor issues, like this can totally happen. So yeah, what you do is you again increase the space so that there's like an area between the cards, like more margin, where just like now you can see my finger fits again, where you just have like this safe area where people can like scroll. Okay, now we have a really good solution for that. And now the only thing, I'm going to go back one. The only thing now that I've learned is the pseudo element is a good trick, but it makes it so that the text is not selectable. Because it's like the pseudo element is on top of, for example, here the paragraph. And if somebody wants to select this paragraph description and copy it somewhere, it doesn't work. I must admit that I personally, when I just design like a blog overview like we have here, I usually stop here because I think for this use case, it's not like, you can say you disagree with this, but like I think like it's not super necessary that people are able to select this, because I think that it's much more likely that people click on the article and after they've like, oh, this is a good article, like they, I don't know, select text and paste it or whatever. But there might be other use cases for cards where you do need to have the text selectable, even though there's a link on the whole thing. And for that, I'm not going to go through that because as I said, this is not a technique that I usually use. But there is a JavaScript solution for this. And it's also, there's a really great code example in the inclusive card component called like under the headline, the redundant click event, by Hayden Pickering. And if you have a use case for this, then I really suggest that you check that out. That's very good. Okay, but for our use case, we're going to stick with this for now. And now I want to talk about, and now this is the only time that I'm bringing like theory into this. I want to talk about affordances because this is now important for the next part. So this is a term that comes up often. Like I'm studying for a certification right now, and this is a concept that comes up often. And it says it's defined as a design affordance is a clue about how an object should be used, typically provided by the object itself or its context. This is a definition by like a quote by Sherry Haber, who is an accessibility specialist. Link is also in the slide. Yeah, so basically what that means is that you see a thing and you intuitively know what to do with the thing. And this is really important for something that is supposed to be interactive. Like people have to know what to do with it. So I think in our example, it's a bit like it's quite clear, like it's a blog article and people should be able to click on it. And they should know I can click on this. So it is the most important affordance for cards is probably that you can interact with them. And as I said, in this case, to click on it to read more. So does that mean now that we have to bring back the read more link? Yes, I think so. because just by adding this back in, even though we don't need it anymore as a link, we have a clear, okay, like a very, very clear signal, okay, this is what happens when you click on this and you're supposed to click on this. So I think this is a good thing for accessibility. But of course, because we don't need it as a link, we don't add it back in as a link. We just add it back in as like decoration. So how you can do it is that you just add a span tag for the read more, and you mark it up visually however you like it, like however your design system like wants a link to look like. So, and it doesn't matter that it's not actually a link because the whole card is clickable, and so you can just like click on it, right? But you don't, like, we don't want it to be like we don't want to give this also to a screen reader user, because for them it's like confusing that it's like decorative as a link. It's like for people who can like see the card, because like when you're using a screen reader, then the screen reader announces this is a link, right? Okay, so we use a little bit of aria here with like an aria hidden value of true on the span element. We take it out. Now, this is a good solution for screen reader users who can't see the card. But also people, like there's also sighted screen reader users. So people who use the screen reader for a variety of reasons, because they have low vision or it helps them digest information, for example. And then for them, it's a bit confusing that there is something that looks like a link. It looks like something you can interact with, but it's not read aloud. So this can be confusing. And then with to kind of like remedy this, there's another trick we can use. We can still keep it as aria hidden, but we give it an ID. And then we link that ID to the actual link, like we connect it with aria described by. So that means on the link tag, you have an aria described by, and then the ID of your read more span. What this does is it doesn't look any different visually, but what it does is that it makes it so the read more is announced when a screen reader like reads the link. So it would say link. I'm really bad at, like, I don't have memorized how which screen reader would read it out, but it would basically be like link rare birds to see, that is the headline, and then read more, because the description, like aria described by, is always read out last. This is really good in this use case, right? So that is something where we can make it more accessible for all screen reader users. Yeah, then let's see what else we can do. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot what the next slide was. So then in WordPress, you're working in WordPress, right? And so you basically, you're probably writing a loop for this. And you're not like hard coding all the IDs. So what you need is to have a unique ID that is kind of like automatically generated by your code, right? So one way how I do this in PHP is that I used the headline, like the title of the article that we're linking to here, as like kind of like the basis how I generate the ID, because I assume that those titles will always be unique. I just hope that the editors work like that they don't create a lot of blog articles with the exact same headline title. So I turn the headline into, like, the title of the article into an ID with this nifty little PHP. Like, who is excited that we're seeing PHP here? I'm just going to explain it real quick, but it's probably better if you get the slides and copy it. So basically we have a variable, the title, that we just get with get the title. And now we have the title of the article. And then we need to turn that article, because it has like spaces and maybe some funky like symbols in there or whatever. And we can't have that as the ID. So we need to turn it into something that can actually work as an ID. So I'm using a delimiter, like as what I want to use as a separator between the words, right? Just like a dash, like a URL kind of. And then I generate the ID with basically a lot of like PHP like replacements and like turning it into lower case, then like replacing all of the like the spaces and all of that with the delimiter, et cetera, just copy the code. And then I can use it in my template. I can just echo the ID in the span for the read more link, and then I have a unique ID in WordPress, which is cool, really cool. So now we have it at a pretty good state, but there's still a lot of like some things that we can do to improve it. So what we can do, what I want to talk about now is keyboard navigation. So people who use the keyboard and how that experience would be for them. If you tap to this card now, the keyboard focus goes to the actual link. So here, like I'm showing the card with like a visual keyboard focus of a dotted line around the headline. So this is like, I don't know, I mean, fine, but like it doesn't really represent that you can interact with the whole card, right? And it's also confusing, why doesn't it go to the read more? Because it looks like a link. So what we want is to have the visual focus around the whole card. So here in this example, I put it around the dotted line around the whole card. And actually how we do it is that we remove in CSS the outline on the link tag. One of the very few cases where you can do this, because we're removing it there, but we're adding it to the pseudo-element when the link gets focus. So this way, when somebody taps to the card, the whole card gets the focus. And that's how I do it in my project. Then also what you might want to add is you want to add like also like a type of hover effect. So usually like I have a hover effect that I show, like, you know, when somebody hovers with a mouse above the card, but then also I add the hover effect to the focus style. So here, for example, I'm giving the span that has our decorative read more link. I'm giving it a different background color. For as the hover effect, you can use a different hover effect. You can creativity. Yeah. So let's see. Now we're going to talk about the images. Maybe some of you have been waiting for this, but yeah, so here, yeah, the question with images is always like, do they convey like important information that a screenreader user should have, or are they decorative? If they contain informative information, that they should have a descriptive alternative text. If not, then you can mark the images as decorative with an empty alt text. In this case, like I know that there's a debate also on when is an image like decorative or not. I must say that with cards, I usually like I err on the side on like wanting to give screenreader users the same type of like efficiency that I as a sighted person have. So like I don't like, for example, here it's like a blog article. And I'm pretty sure that when I select images for blog articles, I'm not looking, in many cases, I'm not looking, do I want to specifically show this specific image of a bird? No, I just want to have a bird for like an article about birds, right? So it doesn't really matter that it is this particular photo. And I think for efficiency, so that screenreader users don't have to listen to all of that, I would leave the alternative tag empty. But I think there are use cases where you definitely have an informative image in a card that actually determines if a user wants to click on this. So for example, here, I'm showing like more of like an e-commerce use case where the cards are not for a blog, but for products. So each card has a product. And so here I have 3 cards next to each other. Instead of a read more link, we now have a buy link, or I should have probably have said like go to details or something like that. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that a lot of product names sometimes I'm not really descriptive of what the thing is. So for example, here I've chose like product names such as Birdie Max Ultra Precision, and then the image shows a telescope, or Birdie Max Lightweight on the go. Like you wouldn't know from this headline, if you didn't have the image of the binoculars, that this would actually be binoculars. So I think you can't rely like with like e-commerce that the title is always very descriptive and you don't need the image anymore. And also there's some often like variations of the same product, and you need to show that in like an image. So here it's definitely a case for alternative text. And so here I'm showing again the HTML markup, and I'm adding the alternative text in. Here the Birdie Max Ultra Precision is a purple telescope with a 3-legged stand. That is the alternative text. The problem with this approach, though, is that when a screenreader user navigates the page by like listing out all the headlines, and then jumping to the headline that they find interesting, they might miss the image because they jump directly to the headline, and here the image is before the headline, so they would jump right over it. So like a better semantic or logical structure of this would be like to have the headline before the image. So this is what I'm showing here with this, I changed the card layout around so that the image is below the headline. I don't know about you, but my designer would not like if I did that. So it's like very it's usually you have the image first, like in the visual layout. So what you can do then, luckily you can use a Flexbox CSS layout, and there if you then mark it up as like flex direction column, you can change the order, the visual order of the image of the items with CSS. So you give the image a negative order so it comes up on top. This is not in many cases, this is not, you're not supposed to change the visual layout of a page with CSS because it can be very confusing for example, for the tab order. But in this case, the image is not tabbable, so we're not messing with the tab order this way. So I think it can be permitted. And also, yeah, so the only thing would be maybe a sighted screen reader user would maybe be a bit confused why the visual order doesn't match the order that is read. But I'm hoping, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hoping that this is just a slight irritation and still like the best compromise. Also, if you get, this is a very common pattern, so I'm expecting people to kind of know this pattern a bit. Okay, I'm coming to the end. Now, the most important takeaways. Format your cards as a list. Put a link around the most important elements. Make the whole card clickable by adding a pseudo-element or using this JavaScript trick. If you have additional links in the card, make them clickable by raising them above the pseudo-element with z-index and adding padding to reduce missteps. Also, make it clear what the card does with a descriptive call to action, connected to the link with aria described by. Add focus on hover styles to the whole card. Add empty alt text if the image is decorative. Add alt text for any images that add important information, and in that case, consider changing, if the image is before the headline, consider changing the visual order. So yeah, that is that. I would be super happy if you connected with me, for example, on LinkedIn, and share your card designs. Thank you very much.
Tina, thank you so much for your presentation. We've had a very lively chat and a lot of technical questions in the Q&A that may just be short answer or you may have answered them. So I'm just going to read them and we'll start that way. Does the trick with the pseudo-element work well for voice users?
That is a very good question. I'll have to test it. Honestly, I have not tested it, but I think like for voice users, my assumption is that the it what makes it accessible for voice is the name of the link. Yeah, this is definitely something. This is a really good point. Thank you for bringing this up. I'm gonna give it a think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another technical question for mobile, how big should the margins, as in like in pixels perhaps, should they be to separate one card from another? Is there some standard for that?
There's no standard as far as I know. I would test it, just see like on a mobile, like use your thumb, just yeah, but there's no like official guideline or anything that I know of.
Excellent. Another question. For keyboard navigation, putting the focus on the card is enough to determine that it's a clickable element, or should the focus go on read more?
Yeah, also good question. I think that there's not like a super right or wrong answer with that. Like it depends on what, like when you test it, like what is the most understandable. I think I usually put it on the whole card to kind of like say like this is the element that you can click. I don't know, but yeah, and then I also add hover styles to it to make it like a bit more clear. Yeah.
Yeah, to that end, we have another question in the Q&A. Can you
Yeah.
accomplish this on a beginner level by making the card full focus when you hover and be okay with that? Or do you have to create a card and then add the CSS?
So sorry, can you say it again? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I'll read it word for word. So can you
Okay.
accomplish this on a beginner level by making the card full focus when you hover and be okay with that? Or do you have to create the card and add CSS?
Yeah, so like just using the hover would not be enough, like because it would only be accessible to a mouse user. I'm not sure if I get the question right, but like yeah, generally like this is like to anybody who is seeing this and is like, okay, this is not beginner level, then yes, it's unfortunate that like a lot of like themes make it really hard to do this out of the box. So this is more like what I've shown here is more like, okay, this is when I custom PHP write my templates, how I do it. But also really take a look at this, at, for example, what Amber Hines did for Equalize Digital with like the page builder comparison. Like it's really like if this is like all like kind of like a bit too technical, then really make sure that you do your research when you choose a theme so that hopefully most of these features are already provided by the theme, which is what I think all themes should do.
I think also in some cases, Tina, that developers are in a position where they have to use a theme selected for them. So in that case, they may be developing with the block editor and have limited access to the backend, if any. In that case, it's possible that then like the developing the card would show that it only has hover focus. So then in that case, they would have to use custom CSS to add active focus.
CSS, yes. Yeah. In that case, you need to add CSS. Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you. We have a question about the DOM. Shouldn't the heading start the card, even if visually it's the image before the heading? This is a pattern I've seen often in inclusive components.
So the question would be like, should it just like always start with the headline?
Visually, visually we'll see the image and whether or not that has alt text is one thing, right? We'll have the image, the heading, the blurb, and then there's a button for read more, learn more. So the question is asking in the DOM, shouldn't it be switched so that the heading comes before the image?
Yeah, so I think that this depends on like what this image is. Like, does it really add information or not? If it's a decorative image, then I don't think it matters that it is before the headline. But like if anybody has like a different take on this and something that I might not have considered, then I'm super happy to discuss this. And people can reach out to me.
I'm watching the chat to see if there's any more input on that one.
Mhm.
Another more technical question. Would the article element in a list make more sense semantically for the card?
Article elements in a list.
That's what the question is
Um,
asking. I'm not too familiar
mhm,
with using the article element or
mhm.
seeing it in like
Yeah,
the card block.
yeah. I don't think um I mean a list has to like list items in it to be like HTML valid. I'm not sure if you can like add a landmark in there and still have proper HTML. And I don't see the like it wouldn't like the article would not really give like any additional value to the element in my view. So I don't think I would do that. Yeah.
Yeah, they are saying that they meant to use UL, the UL, then the list element or list item, and within the list item, the article. But I think what you're saying
Yeah,
here,
I'm not sure if that is valid had HTML to put a landmark in a list item. I'm not sure. It might be, but like
it may,
yeah, I would have to look that
yeah,
up.
whether it works
Yeah.
or not, I think is one thing. But I think if you're
Mm-hmm.
considering like a screen reader's experience with that, they're
No.
navigating by certain elements. So if they're navigating by
Yeah.
landmarks, they might miss some contextual information if they hit the article before they hit um, a heading or a picture if it adds.
Yeah. So most screen readers right now don't don't include the article landmark in their list of landmarks, like when you use
Mhm.
landmark navigation. So this would not add any like benefit for like a screen reader user to like have a list and then also have the article. So yeah.
Thank you, Tina. I didn't know that about articles not being accessible for screen readers as a landmark. So
Yeah, like
that's
only
actually good
JAWS
to
does
know.
it. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good to know. But either way, if you're using a list item and you have paragraph text in it, you're making your item accessible to screen readers, sighted users, mouse users, touch users.
Hmm.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Uh, uh, Answer this one. Could you please describe once again, what is the benefit of using unordered list and list items for the card grid and cards?
Yeah. 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 Welcome to. Yeah, so the benefit of using a list markup for cards is that usually you have multiple cards, right? You're showing a grid of multiple items. And when you use the list markup, it gives screen reader users additional features. For example, they can, like the screen reader reads, okay, this is a list, and then it also reads, okay, there are 9 items in this list. And then there are additional navigation features that screen readers provide users for specifically for lists. And so this is like where you can give like screen reader users like the most like benefit, I think. Yeah, and otherwise they just wouldn't have that and would, yeah.
Thank you, Tina. We have time for one more question. And you did cover this, but if you could cover it one more time, just briefly,
Okay.
what is the benefit of accessibility benefit of making the entire card clickable versus having just one clickable element within it? For example, like the headline.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like a question like you can make the just the headline clickable and this would be compliant and like I wouldn't like flag it as like, oh, this is an accessibility mistake or something like that. No. This is more about like usability. I don't know about other people, but when I see like a blog list like of like blog articles and their images, I try like especially on mobile, I click on the image and I expect it to lead to the article, right? And so I think it's something that we're used to because a lot of cards do it. And also in accessibility, you kind of like have to like take into consideration what people are used to. And then I also think that if you can have a bigger click area, it is good for example, for people with motor issues. Yeah, and sometimes it's also a requirement like that, like the designer says like, hey, I want this whole thing clickable. So it's a usability thing, it's not a mistake. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so what I hear from you then is either option would meet WCAG criteria if that's what you're using, either option, but there is the larger touch area and a more common experience in making the card
Yes.
itself clickable entirely.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Awesome. Tina, thank you so much. We are out of time. I want to thank everyone else for attending our session with Tina. You can continue the conversation in the chat or on social media. We have a few hashtags, hashtag WP Ally Day and WP AD 2024. We'll also appreciate if you go to the 2024.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation. You can also enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. Now, stay tuned for creating inclusive experiences with WooCommerce. This will be coming up next with Athira and Fahad from Barrier Break at 13 p.m. UTC. While you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors pages to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. See you after the break.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor, WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.